My name is Stephen Evans. I'm a Sydney artist full-time, and I'm here today to show you how to paint a cloudscape using artist's acrylic paint. I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the original custodians of this land, and pay my respects to elders both past, present and emerging. Always was and will be Aboriginal land. So today, this is an example. I've actually got a couple that I've brought in with me to kind of give us a little heads up on how I approach cloudscape painting. I guess I originally fell in love with painting clouds like most people when they were kids. One of the first things kids learn to paint is clouds. You only have to look at any kid's painting or drawing to see that. They're also one of the easiest things in the world to paint. All clouds are different shapes and sizes and colours, and anyone that I've worked with at workshops or schools can generally master a cloud in one session with me. So hopefully I can help some people and inspire them to get painting and do some clouds. This particular cloudscape here is one of my finger painting clouds. It's a technique that I use quite regularly. It's a great way of getting a really kind of raw and immediate impression of a painting onto canvas. And generally I use it when I'm painting plein air or outdoors, because the light's always changing, clouds are always moving, and you have to work very fast to get the idea down on canvas. This particular cloudscape, I've put the light source down near the bottom corner, and the light source is actually behind the clouds, which is why, if you look here, only the edges of the clouds are getting highlights. And we're going to go a little bit into light sources and perspective in a moment. Here's another example here. This is a great, I guess, way of explaining how a sky and a cloudscape works. If you notice here, first of all, with the actual sky, it's deeper at the top of the sky and it's lighter and warmer at the bottom of the sky. So also, the clouds higher up in the sky always appear bigger than the ones at the bottom. This is because of what we call a vanishing point. The vanishing point is the point that is furthest away from where you, the viewer, are. So when you're looking at the bottom of a sky, you're looking at the furthest distance away. And when you look up into the sky, it's closer to you. So it's a very easy way to remember how to get that small to large ratio in your sky and cloudscape. The other important thing is that because the sun is above and it's pointing downwards because it's daytime, the tops of your clouds have the highlights and the bottom of the clouds have the shadows. Okay, so before we go on to talking about what colours I'm going to use for my palette, it's very important to know how I approach colour and light in general. This is probably the broadest sort of range of colours I use. They're all acrylic colours because acrylic paint dries faster, even with various drying mediums that I can use. I can work over my painting in one sitting, whereas with oil paint, you have to come back over a number of days to get your depth into a painting. So the way I approach colour and light is I tend to see it as warmer colours to cooler colours, and the warmer colours are the lighter colours and the cooler colours are deeper. So if you look here, and I've done a couple of nice little illustrations to go with it, the warmer colours, things like flowers and fire and oranges and light and warmth, generally are your yellows to oranges to reds. Then as we go through our red colours and start working towards our cooler colours, we're going from reds through to magenta. And magenta is where colour starts getting cool. And on the other side of the scale, we can go, when we add, of course, blue and yellow, we get our limey and our green colours. The more yellow, the lighter the green and the warmer. And the more blue we add, the darker it gets and the cooler it becomes. Then we get around to the really deep beasts, which is the deep ultramarine blues and the phthalo greens and the purples. These are like the beastie colours that take light away. Now, there's a general rule with painting. Generally, paintings start with a white canvas. The more colour an artist puts together, the more colours they blend, the darker and the deeper the colour becomes. So in order to get depth, you mix more colours together. The less colours you use, the brighter it is. One more really important thing about this palette, this colour range here, is that it doesn't include black. what I'm going to be showing you today, you don't use any black in your painting or on your palette. I don't use it generally as a rule. I find that it deadens colour and it pulls away these beautiful intense tones that we work so hard to get. Now, the palettes, what we're going to be using today for our cloudscape, first of all, we're going to be using some cooler blues to warmer blues for our sky. And for our clouds, we're going to be using a titanium white. Now, there are a couple of different whites. There is zinc and titanium. I always find that titanium is firstly, it's a more readily available colour and it's more reliable to work with. It's a more solid colour, whereas zinc white is more of a mixing transparent colour. So if you're not kind of used to using a lot of different tones, always go for the titanium white. The other colours that we're going to be using are basically our primary colours, which are yellow, red and blue. And then we're going to be using a couple of secondary colours, like a burnt umber and possibly a purple colour. Just to, when we mix up those darker tones, we're going to make it a little bit interesting.
What brushes do I need to paint clouds?
Well, I generally have probably 3 or 4 brushes that I work with. I guess the rule that goes with painting is the larger the brush, the more watered down and diluted the paint. The smaller the brush, the more solid the paint. And I generally use the larger brushes for larger areas like background painting and blocking in. When an artist is doing all their main shapes, that's what we call blocking in. And then these beautiful little bad boys here I use for the fine detail work, especially when you want to get do key lining. A little interesting thing too, when I'm finger painting, the same thing goes. I generally use 2 or 3 fingers for my background painting and maybe a thumb for blending, doing my beautiful sfumato, and my little pinky for doing the fine detail work. We'll probably do a little bit of that today as well. So the other thing I wanted to mention is most artists, before they actually paint their piece, they want to actually mark out what the paint is going to be, and that's why I always encourage artists to draw out their work first, even sketch it on paper before you put it onto canvas. What we've got here, this beautiful big square canvas. What I'm going to do is draw up kind of a square. That's kind of good enough for me. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of get my sort of cloud head going. So I'm going to start with some little clouds at the bottom of my canvas. And remember, that can be any shape or size or any configuration. You can't paint a wrong cloud. So I'm just going to start with some small clouds here at the bottom. So I'm using a HB pencil here. I'd probably recommend that you use HB. The reason being that the higher the number of your pencil, the softer the lead, and the more likely it is to smudge, and the harder it is to paint over. You want to get the idea on the canvas, but you still want to make those lines disappear when you paint. So I'm going to put a few more lines on the bottom here. Now, as I go up my canvas, the clouds are going to get larger. So I'm going to start with a larger cloud here. And I might do a nice, big, massive cloud at the top. And I think that's given me a really good, we could even do a tiny little one down the bottom here. So you can see that took me no time at all. It's very simple, just some kind of like nice little fluffy cumulus clouds going from small to large or from far away to close to you. And I think that's a really good template to work from. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to set that up here where I can see him, and we're going to draw straight onto our canvas. So what we'll do, we're going to start down the bottom here with some smaller clouds. Now I'm pretty happy with that. I might just do a couple of big fluffy kind of shapes up the top here. And I reckon that's a really good start. So I want to show you this medium. This baby here, the drying retarder. Now there are a few different brands on the market. What it generally is, it's a carrier and it's an extender medium which extends the drying time of your acrylic paint, and it gives you a little bit of room to play with the paint before it dries completely. The one I'm using today is a Derivan drying retarder. It's water-based, it's really safe. And what I generally do with it, they recommend you do this, is you water it down, usually about 10% to 90%, 10% of the drying retarder to 90% water. So I can actually spray this directly onto the canvas, and that I can actually feel that. Now, part of that is going to soak into that gesso background, but it's going to give me a good little carrier, so when I start painting, that can blend in and give it a nice little grade, and it'll also extend the drying time. Now I'm going to start with my bigger brush. Remember, the bigger brush, the more diluted or the more watered down the paint. And I'm simply going to start by painting in that background colour. So this particular colour is a cerulean blue. So cerulean blues, there's also sky blues you can buy. There's a whole bunch of different blues. I really kind of like cerulean blue hue. It's not too expensive, and it's overall a really good basic sky colour. Another really good one, go-to, is basically cobalt blue. With cobalt, sometimes you want to maybe add a little bit of white to it. Now, as I'm getting further down the canvas, I'm going to spray a little bit more retarder. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually add a little bit of white to my blue. So I'm literally just going to blend that. Now I'm using these really cool, they're like a little disposable throwaway palette. Artists use pretty much anything. You can use old vinyl, you can even paint directly onto a mix on a table. So what I'm doing now, I'm starting to mix a little bit of white with my blue, and as I get further down the canvas, that's going to get lighter. Now, obviously, as I get further down the canvas, more white, less blue, a little bit more drying retarder. The main job of the blocking in is to get that base colour down. That big background. The sky is always, I guess, the most labour-intensive bit. I should probably mention too, all my shirts look like this. It's always good to have heaps and heaps of rags or paper towel. If you've got an old shirt you don't wear anymore, that's your painting shirt. And if you're right-handed, my general rule is always have one of these in your left hand, or if you're left-handed, have one in the right hand. Always at the ready. Now that I've got I guess most of my base colour down, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start blending from dark to light, or from light to dark. So we're going to start at the bottom of the painting, and I'm going to come over this side so you can kind of have a look. I'm just going to start dragging my brush across. If you notice, I'm kind of going horizontally, just dragging, gradually bringing that light up to mid blue. So yes, I'm doing basically what it's called, I'm grading from light to dark. And as I go up, now you might be a little bit worried that the clouds are disappearing at the moment, but as this dries, those lead pencil marks are still coming through the paint, so I can still see my clouds underneath. So don't be too worried if you paint over your lines at this stage. So I'm now mixing a deep ultramarine. I'm going to mix that blue I've got here with an ultramarine and a phthalo blue. Now remember what I told you earlier, how the more colours you mix, the deeper the colour or the tone becomes. So I'm actually mixing 3 blues, and we're going to make a really nice deep dark colour, which is going to be at the top of our sky. And I'm just going to blend that down to my mid colour. And again, I'm working across the canvas. So What I'm doing is, as I work the painting, that retarder is still mixed in with that original blue. So I'm finding it's kind of one of those trial and error. You've got to kind of, after a while, you get a feel for the paint. You get a feel for the flow. You know if the paintbrush starts dragging across the paint, that the paint is starting to dry, and you might want to get a little bit more water on that brush and just give a little spray of the retarder. Remember, it's only 10% retarder, so it's predominantly water. I can generally feel at the moment, especially using the big brushes, is that you can feel that the brush is dragging very freely and evenly across the canvas, and I can actually see close up how those colours are mixing together.
Oh, okay, so we can actually genuinely say, like, because you've used the retarder, it's making it easier to blend up the top there.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm pretty much sold on these little spray cans. They're fantastic. And look at this, I can actually fit that in my hand. I can have my brush here, and I can be finger painting. I very rarely have to put this down. I can be working with that all the time. Yeah. You could almost have your little go-to, your little toolkit here. Yeah. So I've nearly finished my little, I can come back up and I can do a little bit more blue later. I'm just really, really keen to start getting my clouds on. So I'm looking at that now. I probably want to do a little bit more white at the base. As the paint dries a little bit, you kind of get a really good idea, a really good sense of what is next. So I'm going to get some white here, and your little go-to, your little toolkit here. Yeah. So I've nearly finished my little, I can come back up and I can do a little bit more blue later. I'm just really, really keen to start getting my clouds on. So I'm looking at that now. I probably want to do a little bit more white at the base. As the paint dries a little bit, you kind of get a really good idea, a really good sense of what is next. So I'm going to get some white here, and I'm just going to do a little bit more white at the bottom. And I'm pretty happy with that at the moment. To do my clouds, what I want to do is I want to start with, I guess, like just kind of mid color, almost like a light sort of creamy grey. So I'm using kind of like a smally to mid brush. That's going to be for marking out the clouds down here. Then we're going to go for one of the bigger brushes for the larger clouds. So I'm going to start over here. I can still see those lines underneath. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to start blocking in that tone. And this is, I guess, your base colour for your clouds. Now when once we paint these on, we're going to find, as I spoke to you about earlier, our light source, which is here. And then we're going to actually add lighter tones and whites and warmer tones to the top of our cloud, and we're going to bring those cooler shadows to the bottom. So I'll put a few more of these on. Now, if you're not used to painting clouds or you don't do painting every day, it's a good idea to have picture references of what you want to paint. I always find it's really good when these days where we have those beautiful technological smartphones, so you can take as many photos of anything as you like when you're out or you're at the beach or you're going for walks. Also, the great thing about clouds, and you don't even know it's happening, is they're very meditative, because you're working with these beautiful fluffy shapes, and when you're actually, I guess, looking for clouds and studying clouds, it has a very calming effect on you, and it is actually very meditative to paint them. You're also, because you're only focused on one thing, you're focused on painting them, it tends to block everything else out that's happening at that moment. I'm going to put a few more down here. I'm going to get my bigger brush now for doing my larger clouds at the top here. This is always a good time as well to start seeing the shape and the composition, and you can always see where you want to add a couple more clouds. I might put a nice couple of little wispy clouds at the top here that are a bit broken up. Okay, so I've got some really nice shapes on the go. I might put another little cloud here. So what I'd like to do now, while that's sort of settling in, is I want to start putting maybe some darker tones at the bottom of my clouds. So with the same brush, I'm going to mix some blue, a bit of red, a little bit of this kind of, it's like an ochre colour, warmer tone. And I've created kind of a nice, almost like a grey purple colour. So I can come over to the bottom of my cloud here and start putting in some darker tones. Now I'm going to show you a little trick, guys. This is where your finger painting comes in. Now you can come over here. Now with my, I guess my medium brush, which is 2 fingers, I'm going to come in here. In fact, I'll use my big brush. I'm actually going to blend that a little bit. Now you can see, I only got a little bit of paint on there. And just keep wiping with my paper towel. And a little bit more blending in. And as I get up here in my larger cloud, I can be a bit more liberal with my paint. Now if you don't get your cloud painting done in one sitting, that's okay. You can spend days and days working on these paintings. You basically paint dries, you come back and then you just work fresh over the top of it again the next day. Sometimes it's really good to do that so that you can actually get more layers. So I'm kind of happy with how that looks at the moment with those darker areas. What I like to do now that's sort of generally in place is I want to come back to the top of my clouds. I'm feeling that now it's still a little bit wet from the drying retarder. So while that's wet, I want to blend some white into those lighter mid-tones. So what we're going to do, another very important thing, change your water. Change it regularly because otherwise it ends up looking like a big blue purple milkshake.
Here's some clean water.
Thank you. Thank you, assistant. Okay, good to go. So I've got my paper towel, my drying retarder. I'll just give that a little bit of a spray up here. And I can start painting in my highlights. So I can kind of still see some lines up here coming through the blue, so I'm still using those as a guide. And you don't need to use a large brush, you can use any size at this point. I'm just going to go larger to get this down and pretty much follow those lines now. Now, as that paint at the top is still a little bit wet, that's telling me that I want to use less water and more paint because I want that white to be quite solid.
So you're kind of landing that paint on top, aren't you? You're not like trying to blend it in.
At the moment, no, I'm not. I just want to get a nice bit of solid definition at the top of my cloud. I can always come back and work that in because, as I said, that is still wet. But I like to get you some really nice solid white at the top here. You might find you've got to do 2 or 3 layers of white to get it really strong. It does take a lot of practice to work wet paint on wet paint. And as we come around here, a little bit more here.
When you do cloud demonstrations, do people always talk about The Simpsons?
They do, yes. And I believe that the Simpsons clouds are based on kids' clouds. I'm often accused of painting Simpsons clouds. They're also my favourite cloud. They're the sunny clouds, so the cumulo, I'm going to bore the hell out of everyone now, so the cumulonimbus cloud, which usually has the big tower at the top, that's the rain cloud. The cumulus cloud is the nice big sunny fluffy cloud that tells you it's going to be a beautiful day. I'll be going down to a smaller brush in a moment. Now at the top here, I'm going to do a little bit of finger painting. This is kind of like my wispy sort of cloud that's starting to break up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some white in here, and I'm just going to sort of blend that in a little bit. Now, don't be too concerned about accuracy with these, because this is kind of just have a little bit of fun, a little bit of broken up, and it just shows you sort of like how, if anything, it'll make that cloud look sharper by looking sort of, I guess, less defined. It's always nice to have sort of a bit of variety in your sky. Feel free to experiment too with your fingers, whatever feels more comfortable. And now I want to come over here to my other sky. I want to get some smaller brush action going on. So I'm going to sort of nice little height here to paint my lower clouds. Now I'm going to give that bottom just a little bit of a spray. Okay. Okay, so that is my, I guess, my very basic cumulus cloudscape. I'm just running you very quickly through the whole elements again. You've got the dark to light blue sky, or cooler to warmer. You've got your big fluffy clouds at the top going down to your smaller clouds. Your highlights at the top and your darker areas at the bottom of your cloud. And then when you're finishing up, you're working basically just solid colours. So solid whites up here, a few solids here, and then you can run a little bit of dark blue through just to finish it off and give it some crisp. The only thing left, of course, is to sign. Before I do that, I just want to give you a couple of quick little tips. Paintings always look better and are probably better for longevity and to protect them if they get a coat of clear varnish. You can use a matte varnish or a gloss varnish. I tend to use a gloss varnish. So let's get signing.